So like, what is a case study really? I want you to think about the word case, right? You think about, sometimes we use the phrase "in this case," which suggests something that is situational. So if I said, in this case, you can't do that. Like something I will say to my kid a lot. Just this one particular situation, no kid, you can't jump off of that. In this case, no. Other times, sure, probably fine. But for this case, right? So something that's situational, something that's like just this one instance, right? You also can think of the concept of a case like lawyers. Lawyers take on cases, and every lawyer takes on a different case. And every case that a lawyer takes on is a little bit different from the last one. Just because a divorce lawyer got, $6 million mansion awarded to a wife in one case does not mean that he will be able to, or she will be able to get a $6 million mansion awarded to every wife in every divorce case, right? Because it is a case-by-case basis. And so I think that's just kind of like a good way to begin. You're picking a case. What case are you taking on? And that kind of brings me to something else, which is to have a true case study, you want your case to lead you to the argument that you're going to make about social media and not really the other way around. And so I want to talk about there's three things, maybe four things here, and I want to give you examples of each of them just to really fully understand, like, what does that mean? So, a true case study is where you pick something, right, that is someone on social media or a topic that people are talking about on social media or whatever, right? Because that's where we're focusing our efforts here, is social media. And a true case study, the best case study that you could have is you don't actually know what you're going to argue about this case because you haven't studied it yet. Okay. It's okay to not know. So if you're like, well, I don't know what kind of argument I would make about that case, that's kind of where you want to be. You don't really want to have an argument and then pick it, although I'm going to talk about that in a second. You want to be at a place where, like, you know what? I see a lot of people talking about Taylor Swift on social media, so I'm going to pick her as my case study and just figure out what I'm going to say after I study her, right? That's the study part of the phrase case study. You're doing like this real interesting psychoanalysis, Freudian things, very much a psychology concept here where you're like, I'm going to watch what you're doing. It's kind of creepy, but it's all right. It's social media. People are posting publicly. But you're kind of like watching what other people are doing, and then you're going to observe them and make arguments about them, and apply that to the small piece of the pie gets applied to the whole pie, which is sort of another concept of a case study. Okay, so it's okay to have a hypothesis, but you also want to be really flexible. If you're having a true case study, you don't really know what the outcome of this study is going to be, or what argument you're going to be able to make, or really like what observation you're going to be able to make about social media as a whole. You have a little bit of a hypothesis, but you're flexible and you're willing to change your mind if it doesn't kind of follow your hypothesis. That's okay. That's the best type of case study. So for example, like outside of social media, if I picked my neighbors as a case study, I would go and let's say they agreed, right? This wouldn't be so creepy to where I would break into their homes, but I would go and live with them for like 2 weeks and just observe them. Like, what do they do? What's going on? Super interesting. Writing down notes. What am I seeing? How do they talk to each other? How do they live? And by looking at that, I could make an argument about my neighbors. My neighbors are really like nice suburban people who support local business, blah, blah, whatever I wanted to say or argue about them. But then to make a broader argument, I could say, well, that means, the majority of people living in my neighborhood must be like this. Now that is always the part that like a lot of my students have trouble with, but that's the concept of a case study, is that you're saying, if I'm looking at this sample, the sample can be representative of the whole, recognizing the fact that that's probably not the case across the board, but that's the concept of the case study. All right, so that is a true, genuine case study. Now, a semi-case study is fine for our purposes, but if you wanted to be a psychologist, this type of case study is actually really unethical, the semi-case study. And so a semi-case study would be like, you already know the argument you want to make about social media, or using my previous example about my neighborhood. And so I would just like find something that I would use to exemplify it. So for example, you had this feeling that like everybody at work hated you. And so you found that one coworker who definitely hated you, and you did a case study on your interactions with that coworker, and that proved that everyone at work hates you or something like that. That's really just kind of honestly confirmation bias, where you think something, and then once you see it, that thing proves that your thoughts are correct or whatever. And so it's the reason I say it's fine for our purposes is because I think that it will elicit the same paper. You say, maybe you want to make a negative argument about social media, and you're like, well, what's that thing that really gets on my nerves? And, then you analyze it and explain like why it gets on your nerves and why that means social media is a bad place or whatever. The issue with that is that it leaves you in like a closed-minded state to say, well, maybe that thing's got some good sides, but you're ignoring it because you're not actually studying the case. You're just looking for the things to prove the argument that you already wanted to make. Now, for our purposes for this paper, I'm not really going to know what you did, but you'll know what you did. And so just, be careful. Try to be as ethical of a researcher as possible. Not a case study, y'all. So something that I would not really want you to do here for the APA paper is just like making a blanket claim about social media. In this case, you would know this is what you were doing because you wouldn't have any primary sources to analyze. You're really just writing like what I would consider it's not really fair for me to say, but I'm gonna just like go for it and call it a boring argumentative essay. And it's like something I would have asked you to write in English 111, or maybe like something you have been asked to write in high school or something like that. Yes, your paper will make an argument, and it will make an argument that's really similar to like a boring research essay. But the way in which it goes about making that argument is what differentiates it from a case study versus just an argumentative research paper. If you are just using secondary sources, other people's research, scholarly articles, textbooks, whatever, to explain your argument about social media, then you don't have a case study and you're not actually studying anything, you're just making an argument. But, and this is the biggest distinction, if you are looking at something and you're reading the primary sources that you see on social media, people's posts, what people are saying about a person or a topic, if it's a person, what those people are saying, comments on all the posts that you're looking at, anything that's found on social media, if you're looking at the primary sources and you're saying, Mark said this on social media, which kind of makes me think X, Y, and Z, which makes me then think about this big thing about social media, and I got to that belief or that argument by looking at Mark's post on social media, that's a case study. It's the process of I saw it, I thought about it, now I'm making an argument, as opposed to I have this argument, or I have this argument and now I'm just going to find things to prove it. That's usually what we do, but in this case we're really kind of going outside of the box. Also, I want to talk about one other thing, which is, what if you have a case study, but it's not really what I'm looking for this assignment? So you can, and this is the biggest thing that I have always a concern with most of the things people pick with their case study topics, and I would say 50% of the essays that I get do this. They do this incorrect thing, which is they've picked a case study, the case study is fine, and they end up arguing about their case study, not about social media. Okay, so my example here would be like, what if you pick Taylor Swift for your case study? Bam, I would approve it instantly, no problem at all. But if your paper spent like 50% or more of the time arguing about Taylor Swift, why she's great, why she's not great, why she does the things she does, etc., that would be a case study, but not what we want for this paper. what we want for this paper is looking at what Taylor Swift does on social media to make a bigger claim about maybe how female celebrities use social media, or celebrities use social media, or women use social media, or people use social media, or whatever. The goal is take it from your case study that whole case, but then broaden it up to say, you know what, this is what it suggests about social media. All of this gets kind of gray if you do pick social media as your case study. Like I've had people pick Snapchat in the past, and so it can get really gray. You know, if someone who had picked Snapchat in the past had to find social media discussions of other people talking about Snapchat, as opposed to just writing an argument about Snapchat. That wasn't the goal. The goal was, what are people saying about Snapchat, and what does that tell you about social media? And so thus your bigger argument about social media might be completely disconnected from the concept of Snapchat, but you looked at what people were saying about Snapchat on social media in order to make a bigger claim about social media as a whole. So again, it gets kind of gray when you use social media as your case study, or some aspect of it as a case study, but at the same time, those generally elicit, I guess, full arguments. Email me if you guys have any questions.